Hello and welcome to yet another video from the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today I'll be discussing a little food for thought. And once again, the subject matter of this video will involve some serious incongruities in the U.S. election process, as well as the effect that those incongruities are having on the social order itself. An incongruity is something that is so out of place that it should stand out to pretty much everyone who sees it or experiences it. Unfortunately, even though most people recognize that something odd is in fact happening, most still seem to be incapable of perceiving where this is all heading. For a fact, by this point, it should be abundantly clear that the American empire has finally reached the end of its oppressive reign over mankind. And to top it all off, the collapse of the American empire is a very trustworthy indication that Lord Satan's entire civilization is nearing an end as well. I remember when I turned 18 that I was really excited about finally achieving the objective of becoming a legally recognized grown-up. Suddenly, all of the cool stuff that grown-ups were able to do was now the stuff that I could do. I could purchase products that were bad for my health, go to nightclubs and bars, and last but not least, vote. Since I really wasn't interested in purchasing things that were bad for me or going to bars, all that was left was voting. Fortunately, I did enough research into voting to be able to figure out that voting was even stupider than the other stuff. I grew up around humans and pretty much figured out by the time I was 6 years old that as a species, humans seemed much more evil and deceptive than any of the other mammals. I also figured out quite early in life that among humans, it was only the most evil and deceptive who ended up in positions of power and authority. I have never actually interacted personally with any so-called world leaders, but over the course of my life, I have interacted with some very high-ranking members of Satan's empire. Simply by watching the world and studying how things seem to work, I was able to figure out rather early on that if my boss at my job got there by being deceptive and evil, and his boss got there by being even more deceptive and evil, that by following this simple, easy to perceive pattern, I was able to determine that the boss of the whole planet would certainly have to excel at being deceptive and evil in some way. That is why the citizens who vote will often say that they are choosing the lesser of the two evils. However, it is yet to be explained why voting for the lesser of the two evils has nearly always resulted in the greater of the two evils becoming the president. And yes, I know that Jimmy Carter doesn't seem to fit this pattern. I just figured that allowing Jimmy to win the election must have been part of some kind of other hidden side agenda. People want leaders that they can trust. They want to believe that such leaders actually exist, and they want to believe that the system for choosing those leaders actually works. Hence, when people are told that it is their duty to participate in that process, they often do so willingly. The word vote comes from the Latin word votum. In ancient Roman religion, a votum, or plural vota, is a vow or promise made to or for a deity. Voting could be described as the act of choosing one's gods or communicating with said gods. In older dictionaries, the origin of the word vote is defined as to pray. I've never actually believed that the President of the United States was elected by popular vote. I don't even believe that the President is chosen by the Electoral College. And how I was able to figure this out was simply by paying attention while I was attending public school. I knew that most of what was taught in school was pretty much useless nonsense and propaganda. This was especially obvious once I got to high school. In high school, I was required to take a class called government, another class called democracy, and yet another class called communism. Each and every one of those classes taught that we Americans, unlike the people who lived in all of the bad countries, were free. Being forced to attend public school, I was pretty sure that I wasn't really free at all, but of course, none of my teachers ever bothered trying to resolve this very obvious, blaring discrepancy. Anyway, we were told that one of the key differences between America and all of the bad countries was that we got to participate in choosing our so-called leaders. It seemed to me that grown-ups were really obsessed with making children believe in this ridiculous nonsense, so just from that, I pretty much knew that it had to be a lie. There really couldn't be any other reason for them to push this point so hard. If it was actually true that we got to choose our so-called leaders, we children could have probably figured that out for ourselves, saving millions of dollars in taxpayer money that was being wasted on the public indoctrination system. In any case, there is a pretty good show put on every 4 years to make us believe that the miserable hell on earth that we are currently experiencing is somehow our own fault, as if the poor choices that we made at the voting booth is what got us into this situation. And unfortunately, most people seemingly can't accept that this bastion of so-called freedom could possibly be a scam. That is until the 2020 presidential election. For some reason, half of the citizens of this country were finally able to figure out that the elections were fraudulent. I suspect that this exponential increase in knowledge happened when Donald Trump, the incumbent, became the most popular presidential candidate since George Washington, and yet still somehow lost the election. But there could also be something happening in the spirit realm to bring this about at this particular point in world history. As 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3 says, "That day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, is revealed." As a result of exposing the U.S. election process as the farce that it is, that prophesied rebellion has begun. The coming of the Antichrist and the end of civilization cannot be far behind. When I say that Donald Trump was the most popular candidate in American history, I'm not basing that on the figures that show up in the news. Those polls are every bit as dishonest as the actual elections themselves. I'm just going by what I could see in the real world. Millions of patriotic, crazed people bowing down in worship of a real estate mogul / casino operator. As insane as that may seem, we have to take into consideration what he represented to the American voter. First off, he spent a lot of time talking like an actual patriot. And when you put any amount of effort into checking what he said against the facts, he really never strayed very far from reality. Most politicians, including our current president, just can't seem to pull that off. Even though most, if not all, Republicans were able to figure out that the 2020 elections were fraudulent, most are still unable to admit to themselves that all U.S. presidential elections have been fraudulent in some way. And worst of all, they still somehow don't seem to be able to figure out that the 2024 elections will be no different. I obviously don't care one bit about which politician claims to rule the world. My ruler is, and always has been, Jesus Christ. No politician will ever lead mankind properly. Society is just as bad off today as it was the last time Jesus was here. As the Bible says at Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Now, America is preparing for yet another presidential election, and once again, the contest is between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Only this time around, President Biden is very obviously not well. Every time he is placed in front of a camera, he stumbles around as if he is lost and says things that make absolutely no sense. He was already pretty incompetent the last time he ran for president, but this time around, there really isn't any way of hiding the fact that President Biden no longer has the cognitive abilities necessary to make any decision about anything. Even though American presidents have little, if any, input in governmental policies, people actually believe that they do. So that being said, our current president has a lot of explaining to do, and without the ability to form complete sentences, the possibility of him being able to do so is pretty much non-existent. Around the world, most of the popular news outlets are not remaining silent about the direction that the U.S. government is currently taking. America, for a fact, is currently the laughing stock of the planet. Locally, when talking to others like myself, as well as when talking to people who still believe in the system, the consensus is that Donald Trump will once again win the upcoming election by a huge margin. People who have never voted before are saying that they will be voting this time around, out of fear that the current president, who appears to be nearing death, will win yet another term in office and then die. If such a thing were to take place, which would be inevitable, then the current wacky-go-lucky vice president would end up ruling the world. And with the exception of misguided, asexual women like those who star on the American TV program The View, nobody really wants that. President Biden, bless his heart, really does look like he's about to make his glorious, well-earned journey to Valhalla. As I said earlier, I really don't believe that presidents have anything to do with what happens in the real world, but that is not how others see it. Most people will actually say things about their own personal circumstances, followed by the words, because of Joe Biden or because of Donald Trump, as if the president of Earth has something to do with whatever bad thing or whatever good thing is going on in their lives. But even people who have it really good in their personal lives are frightened by what they see in the news. And what is currently passing as the news is some of the most ridiculous nonsense that has ever been recorded on video. We humans like normalcy, and we don't like change. We crave stability. We want to know that the information that we receive via the media is true and unbiased. This is a very understandable thing for logical humans to expect. It's becoming more and more obvious that what we call the news is nothing like that anymore, if it was ever like that in the first place. So even though we are all aware of what is happening in the news, I feel like I need to explain the serious nature of what is actually going on. First off, I seem to remember a time when the news outlets were required to give equal, unbiased coverage to both candidates in a presidential election. Currently, every news outlet, with the exception of Fox, spends most of their time talking about all of the amazing things that Joe Biden is achieving and all of the terrible things that Donald Trump is doing. And conversely, Fox is spending most of its time talking about all of the wonderful things that Donald Trump is accomplishing and all of the terrible things that Joe Biden is doing. Probably the biggest news stories of 2023 and 2024 are about the crimes that Donald Trump has committed, even though there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Donald Trump has ever done anything illegal in his entire life. It is a fact that Trump is rich and he's a politician. So it should be obvious that he is manipulative and misleading. But that would obviously be true of most rich people and most politicians, including Joe Biden. It could be said that being manipulative and misleading is a requirement of the office. But in this country, rich people and politicians know what the boundaries are between being manipulative and misleading and committing a crime. So for the most part, they all honor those boundaries, or at least they do things in a way that prevents them from being convicted when they get caught. To most Trump supporters, it looks like the Democrats are spending all of their time following Donald Trump around, writing down everything that he does, and then out of the blue making those particular things illegal. And then only charging him with those crimes and ignoring that every other rich person and every other politician does the same exact things in the same exact way. And as a non-participant, I can say in all honesty that it looks that way even to me. I'm pretty sure that the way that the news is being presented today would have qualified as a crime when I was growing up. And speaking of crime, in the past, I'm pretty sure that everyone that is currently perverting the law in order to keep Trump from being president could easily be convicted of treason. Laws against such acts are already on the books, and all of the evidence necessary to bring about such convictions has been recorded on video and made publicly available by the perpetrators themselves. Treason is a crime that is punishable by death. The judges, lawyers, law enforcement officials, and politicians involved in this deception are treading on very, very thin ice. The people in this country who are patriotic are not going to just keep taking these perceived injustices. Once this election is over, the world is never going to be the same, no matter how things work out. It is mind-boggling to me that the Democrats were unable to figure out that making Donald Trump into some kind of martyr was not going to work out for them. If anything, his winning of the popular vote is pretty much guaranteed now. The vast majority of Americans now believe that Donald Trump is mankind's only hope. It is as if the Democrats want Donald Trump to win the election more than the Republicans do. Nobody has to take my word for what I'm about to say, but for a fact, Jesus Christ is mankind's only hope. Without some kind of divine intervention, humanity is doomed. No politician can save even their own self, much less an entire nation. As Psalms chapter 146 and verse 3 says, "Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal man who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing." Now I'm going to talk about other things that are being presented in the news as a means of making it appear that the Democratic Party is the good guys. Unpopular minority groups who claim to be oppressed are being glorified. No president in U.S. history has ever won an election by representing an unpopular minority at the expense of the rest of the nation. And even though this concept is understood by everyone, the current administration is representing a whole bunch of unpopular minority groups. This way of doing business by the Democratic Party is absolutely mind-boggling. It is as if the powers that be are intentionally making the Democrats look like idiots. In order to appease the Black Lives Matter group, the criminal justice system is now bending over backwards in order to accommodate violent criminals. And BLM is celebrating this as some kind of victory. The problem with this minority group is that it only represents a minority of a minority. Black people are no different than white people. They're human beings just like all of the rest of us. They are victims of violent crime just as often, if not more often, than any other race of people. All people want to feel secure. Nobody wants to be victimized. The only people who benefit from the current administration's way of handling criminal activity is criminals. And as far as I know, criminals, in most cases, don't vote. The Democrats are also spending a whole lot of time and effort into changing the gun laws, and not in any way that would make the world a safer place. Thankfully, every bit of gun legislation that has been put forth by the Democratic Party has failed, but it is out there for the whole world to see. And plenty of gun owners, Democrat and Republican alike, are confused and upset about why the current administration is attempting to take away their gun rights, the gun rights of law-abiding citizens, without any kind of working plan on how to take away guns from criminals. People who once felt relatively safe from violent crime no longer feel that way. In fact, as violent crime escalates beyond belief, many people have fallen for the propaganda being presented by the state and are now opposing the police more than they are opposing actual criminals, putting even more stress on the police and the criminal justice system. The effect of such policies is leading the U.S. into a situation of lawlessness that nobody is happy with. The majority of American citizens blame the current administration for the very obvious deteriorating conditions that they are having to endure. And you really can't blame them. The next utterly nonsensical thing that the current administration is doing involves the new government policies regarding the so-called LGBT community. Laws to protect transgender people are supported by nearly everyone, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. But the way that the Democrats are doing it is preposterous. Policies that are obviously not beneficial to anyone are being represented as basic human rights, when in fact they are nothing more than offensive to pretty much everyone, including most transgender people. Very few people, including true transgender people, think that it is okay for biological men to compete in women's sports or women's beauty contest. And most transgender people are not complaining about which restroom they have to use. Quite a few public places have what are called family restrooms with doors that lock for people who don't feel comfortable using the men's room or the ladies' room. If there is going to be a law that everyone can live with, it would be to require all public places to have family restrooms. It seems to me that the only people demanding the right to use the wrong restroom are heterosexual cross-dressers who like to masturbate on women's toilet seats. And most of us are afraid to say anything about it out of fear that we'll be charged with a hate crime. In the past, reporting such behavior was not considered a crime in any way. In fact, such acts were themselves considered to be criminal and could result in a person having to register as a sex offender. If you don't believe what I'm saying, all that you have to do is go watch a few of the videos on Crazy Shit, Chaotic, the YNC, VidMax, and World Watch. I can promise that you won't find any public restroom masturbation videos on YouTube. Aside from all of the weird Democratic campaign destroying stuff that's going on in the world, there is still all of the normal campaign destroying stuff that's going on as well. Even though there is plenty of propaganda being circulated by the current administration about how great the economy is, the very obvious huge increase in the number of people who can't even afford the basic necessities of life is right out there in the open where everyone can see it. The nation's minimum wage hasn't increased even once since 2009, while the cost of basic goods and services has increased drastically. The only argument that could possibly be made to counter that fact is that most people earn more than minimum wage. However, if the minimum wage were to be increased in line with the amount that goods and services have increased, then for a fact the vast majority of Americans would be making what should be the minimum wage or less. Impoverished people are not going to be convinced that they aren't impoverished by some nonsense story put out by the media. Poverty is quite easy to distinguish from a living wage, especially by those who are experiencing it. As for the current immigration crisis, I don't think that either candidate has any workable plan for handling the huge influx of people entering the U.S. via the southern border. But as nightmarish as immigration policies were under Donald Trump, At least he was able to fool the public into thinking that he had things under control. The same cannot be said about the current administration. Many big city dwellers see what is happening as a threat to their safety, security, and well-being, which may or may not be based on reality. But remember, this video isn't really about who's right and who's wrong. It's about public perception and how that public perception is going to affect the election results. These are just a few of the things that are taking place in our world that are pretty much guaranteeing that Donald Trump absolutely cannot lose the upcoming election. And every so-called patriot knows this. The whack jobs who are psycho in love with Trump are all going to vote for Trump no matter what. The whack jobs who suffer from TDS, also known as Trump derangement syndrome, are all going to vote against Trump. Those two groups are split 50-50. If they were the only people stupid enough to vote, it would be a dead tie. But of course, they are not the only people who vote. The remainder of the population, who are basically logical for the most part, are all going to vote for Trump. The guy's already been president for 4 years, and during that time, nothing happened. Nothing good happened to the U.S., and nothing bad happened to the U.S. He has a proven track record of not screwing anything up. Most normal people may not agree with him or even like him, but they feel that they're being forced to choose between Trump, who is just a standard definition, cookie-cutter version of a politician, or Biden, who seems to them to be bringing about the end of the world as we know it. I said earlier that most of the people who I talk to are going to vote for Trump. But that isn't my only source of information. I also watch YouTube videos about the state of the world, and I read the comments. Search though you may, you won't find any video about world events where the comments are not mostly in favor of kicking Joe Biden out of the White House and moving Donald Trump back in. In fact, public opinion seems to be pretty much 100% in favor of Donald Trump. If you're somehow able to convince yourself that only Republicans watch YouTube videos, well, I'm pretty sure you're wrong. I've already said that I don't care about which candidate wins the election, and I mean it. But I can promise you that when Donald Trump ran for president the first time, I never imagined that anyone would actually be willing to vote for him to run the country. But at the same time, I have to admit that I never in my wildest dreams imagined that the Democrats were going to be able to find someone even worse than Donald Trump. As I have said repeatedly, everyone knows that Donald Trump has, for a fact, already won the 2024 election. If the powers that be decide that they're going to cheat him out of another victory, whether once again by election fraud or by sentencing him to prison or by assassination or even by some other means that I haven't even thought of, I'm pretty sure that there really will be a civil war. The citizens of this country are at a boiling point. And they're already expressing that they are no longer going to lay down and take it this time around. My suggestion to anyone who wants to survive what is coming upon the earth is to not participate. Don't register to vote. Don't express any kind of opinion about who your favorite candidate is. And especially don't go posting any kind of opinion about the election on social media. Our Father promised long ago to only allow Satan to rule over mankind for a limited time. And that time is thankfully running out. as God's final spokesman, I can tell you for a fact that civilization is really and truly nearing its end. Our Father has declared that very soon he will return the earth to its original paradise conditions and replace Lord Satan and his current wicked world leaders with Jesus Christ and his chosen representatives. God has promised to begin that process by restoring our solar system in a way that is earth-shattering and undeniable. As a sign that his restoration process has begun, he will put the moon back in its original position so that it will once again become full and remain full for all time. I honestly believe that this will happen during this fall equinox or during the next fall equinox. When someone demands love, dignity, and respect for all human beings, regardless of race, nationality, or sexual orientation, that is called being filled with the Holy Spirit. But when someone demands love, dignity, and respect for any one sector of the population at the expense of others, that is called selfishness. And of course, neither party can claim to be obedient to God's Holy Spirit. I have been watching humanity for many, many years. What I have witnessed over time is distressing, to say the least. Just as Jesus, his apostles, and the prophets before me had to suffer at the hands of the general population, I too have been made to suffer at the hands of the general population. Nothing has really changed since Adam, Eve, and Satan were cast out of the Garden of Eden. But as the last of God's spokesmen, I can say without any hesitation that each and every one of us understand how horrible life has been for you people under Lord Satan's oppressive reign. People who are suffering don't always make the right life choices. I understand. Very obviously, God understands even better than I do. That being said, you need to know that there is still time for each of you to separate yourselves from this wicked system and quit participating in its socio-political hierarchy. There really isn't any other way to show God how much you love him. The only other option is to continue down the path of destruction that Jesus spoke about at Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. This verse is not about going to heaven or hell. That religious nonsense is on its way out, just as civilization itself is on its way out. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 13 is about the coming war that mankind is quickly progressing towards. In fact, we really are already there. If you choose a team, you can count on the other team seeking you out and destroying you. Just like every other fool that chooses to travel on Satan's broad way. If you want to enter into paradise alive and intact, you really have to abandon this man-made hell and its pathetic, senseless rituals and traditions. I cannot make this vital decision for you. I wish I could. All that I can do is tell you what the future holds so that you can make informed, logical decisions for yourselves and perhaps even for your loved ones. As always, I love you all and hope the best for you. And also, as always, if you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.